May we have the audio, please?
We're on in Springfield. We are live streaming and recording as well.
Thank you. Is member McQuarrie there yet?
Not yet. She is fricking right about now, so it'll probably be another 5 or 10 minutes.
Okay, thank you. Morning member Brett and Ballard Croft.
Can you hear us?
The mics weren't working, so I got this one on, and then the ceiling mic.
Chair Watson, can you hear us?
Yeah, we can. I can.
Okay, all right, thank you.
I didn't really hear you, Jennifer.
Okay, we were just testing the mics.
So maybe they need to turn it up a bit because I can't hear you very well.
What is your volume on your speaker?
I can hear you very well, Laura. 75%.
I think we just have to remember to speak into the mic. Oh, you guys is up there. Ours, when it's in Springfield, it's on the table. So don't jump up, guys. Don't get on the table. We don't need any antics.
We don't have table mics today. I'll look up.
Okay.
Are you ready, Member Macquarie?
Oh, yes, I am.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this meeting of the State Board of Elections. It is Monday, December 2nd, 2024. The time is now approximately 9:05 a.m. Will we all please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag
to the
of
flag
the
of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible,
with
with
liberty
liberty
and
and
justice for all.
justice for all. Thank you. Roll call, please, Mrs. Calvin.
Ms. Ballard Croft,
Present.
Ms. Cray. Present. Ms. Genovese,
Here.
Ms. McCrory,
Here.
Mr. Turbin. Here. Mr. Brett,
Here.
Vice Chair Donahue,
Present?
Chair Watson.
Present. Thank you, Mrs. Calvin. The proclamation is number 1. Madam Executive Director, please.
Good morning, everyone. The first item of business.
I
today-
can't hear you at all.
Is this better?
Yeah.
Excellent. Thank
Okay.
you.
Okay, great. The first item of business today is the certification and proclamation of the results for the November 5th, 2024 general election. I'd like to thank Brent Davis, Director of Election Operations, and all of the operations staff for working overtime throughout the holiday weekend to review and prepare this official canvas for presentation today. At this time, I will ask the board for a motion to certify the canvas as presented and officially proclaim the results of the 2024 general election. Thank you.
May I have a motion and second to certify the canvas as presented and officially proclaim the results of the 2024 general election, please?
So moved. Second.
Roll call, please, Mrs. Calvin.
Ms. Ballard Croft,
Yes.
Ms. Cray.
Yes.
Ms. Genovese,
Yes.
Ms. McCrory,
Yes.
Mr. Turbin,
Yes.
Mr. Brett,
Yes.
Vice Chair Donahue,
Yes.
Chair Watson.
Yes.
Motion
Thank you,
passes.
Mrs. Calvin.
Thank you. I'm going to circulate a signature sheet up here in Chicago for the members that are present in Chicago to sign. Amy Calvin will circulate in Springfield for members to sign down there, and any members attending virtually today, we will affix your electronic signature. And then following this certification and proclamation of results, a press release will be issued and the results will also be posted on our website.
Thank you, Madam Executive Director. Next, we have the report of the General Counsel. Madam General Counsel, please.
Good morning, Madam Chair.
Good morning.
We only have 2 cases up today, so this should be relatively brief. The first item is a settlement offer. Agenda item 2A1 SBE versus Excellence in Education 24 MQ 154. Is there anyone present in Springfield on this matter? I see no one in Chicago.
No one in Springfield.
Okay, in that case, I will make this brief. This committee is closed and has a $0 balance because they meet the balance and receipt ratios and are considered low dollar. They've also filed a final report, so I recommend accepting the offer.
Is there a motion and a second to accept the recommendation of the General Counsel on 2A1?
So moved.
Second.
Roll call, please, Mrs. Calvin.
Ms. Ballard Croft,
Yes.
Ms. Cray.
Yes.
Ms. Genovese,
Yes.
Ms. McCrory,
Yes.
Mr. Turbin,
Yes.
Mr. Brett,
Yes.
Vice Chair Donahue,
Yes.
Chair Watson.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you, Mrs. Calvin. Madam General Counsel.
Thank you. Our other case is a complaint following public hearing. It's 2A2 Costello versus Friends of Matthew Taylor, 24 CD 16. This complaint was ordered to public hearing after the board found justifiable grounds existed on complainant's claims that respondent failed to include an attribution of source on campaign materials in violation of section 9-9.5 of the election code. The hearing officer recommends granting complainant's motion to voluntarily dismiss the complaint, and I agree. I see no one here on this case in Chicago. Is there anyone in Springfield?
No one in Springfield.
Okay, well, the recommendation is to grant the motion to voluntarily dismiss.
Is there a motion and a second to accept the hearing officer's recommendation along with the concurrence of the general counsel?
So moved. Second.
Roll call, Mrs. Calvin.
Ms. Bellercroft?
Yes.
Ms. Craig? Yes. Ms. Genovese?
Yes.
Ms. McCrory?
Yes.
Mr. Turbin?
Yeah.
Mr. Vrett?
Yes.
Vice Chair Donahue?
Yes.
Chair Watson?
Yes.
Motion passed.
Thank you, Mrs. Calvin. There are other campaign disclosure items, 3 and 4, potential ballot forfeitures for 2025, and number 4, payment of civil penalty assessment. Both of those are informational. Madam General Counsel, with respect to 2B.
This is an update on the voting and registration systems rules, and I'm going to turn the floor over to our Deputy General Counsel, Jordan Andrew, who will provide an update on those rules.
Thank you. You may proceed, Jordan.
Thank you, Chair. SBE's testing and legal staff are continuing to collaborate in drafting updated rules for testing. And this includes what VVSG standards to incorporate. Since we last spoke about this issue, however, much of our staff's priorities did shift to the November election, but we're now in a place after proclamation that we can circle back and reprioritize. But our legal review does indicate that the SBE does have the authority to clarify our standards for testing and certification, including to incorporate all or portions of the FEC's VVSG standards, be they 1.0, 1.1, 2.0, et cetera. In the past, the board has enumerated these standards in both administrative rules and through board action. But substantively, Part 204 of the administrative rules, which is where our testing standards live in the administrative code, that has not really been thoroughly reviewed since the early 2000s. So at this time now, we're doing a very thorough, very intentional review of our testing processes and procedures against the realities of the voting system marketplace. And also against the policy goals that have been articulated by our board members and by the General Assembly, as well as the practical realities that can result from our testing and certification processes for all of the stakeholders involved, be they election authorities, vendors, voters, SBE staff. So we want to be very cognizant to not unintentionally box ourselves into standards when the marketplace here can see very quick innovation and development. So we're being very intentional when we're crafting what, if any, and portions of, or when we're suggesting that we incorporate standards, we want to make sure that we're not accidentally boxing ourselves in when this is really a technological area where developments happen very quickly overnight. So as you can tell, this process does involve a significant amount of research, analysis, discussion, and collaboration at the SBE professional staff level. We are working very diligently towards having reviewable drafts available for the legislative subcommittee. But as we're doing that, we want to make sure that the drafts are as complete as possible and also include information on the pros and cons of any actions that we suggest we take or that we don't take. So we are working not to just have sort of a draft rule available to you, but sort of, and we want to show our work, basically, a thought process and an explanation of why we suggest this, why we don't suggest this, so forth and so on. But as of right now, in the staff review stage, we do have amendments to e-canvas rules, e-poll book usage as it relates to casting and tabulating votes. not voter registration, and other sort of corollary sections of 0.204 that touch the amendments that we've already drafted. Legal and testing continue to meet regularly and expect the next stage of review to include a deep dive into the actual testing and certification processes and standards. And between both of our divisions, we hope to have these articulated before the Christmas holiday. Our plan is to present the full amendment to Part 204 and any sort of corollary amendments in full to the legislative subcommittee once they've been thoroughly reviewed by their subject matter expert divisions and by executive staff. We very much appreciate the importance of this task, and we are, as always, open to answering any of your questions, having discussions about your concerns, and anything very specific or any items that you'd like some research on. So for any of that, or really anything else, please don't hesitate to reach out. Our doors are always open. We're happy to discuss, but at this point, we're still in that testing, review, drafting stage. So that is where we are at. We know we have the authority, and we're trying to figure out the best way to articulate something that sort of works best for all of the stakeholders involved. Thank you very
Any
much.
questions?
I just have one.
Yeah.
Sure, Watson.
Yes.
Do you have a dream timeline on when? I mean, you said one thing was going to be hopefully before
Yeah.
Christmas holidays. Do you have any kind of set timeline that you're hoping to?
Certainly. Yes.
What would be your dream timeline to get something to the legislative subcommittee?
We would like to have something to you early 2025. So once we have the draft of the testing part and process, that's the biggest part of this. So once we have that articulated and worked through, which we hope to start that process before the Christmas holidays, ideally we'd be looking to early 2025.
Any other questions from board members? Thank you, Jordan, and thank your staff, and all staff members that are working with you.
Thank you.
Madam General Counsel, do you have anything further under the report of the General Counsel?
That is it. My report for this morning is concluded. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is the report of the Executive Director. Madam Executive Director, please.
Okay, the first item on my report is consideration of FY 26 appropriation request. I'm pleased to submit the board's fiscal year 2026 budget request for your review and approval. The request provides for adequate funding to support our ongoing programmatic initiatives and operational requirements. In addition, the FY 26 budget continues to fund the ongoing upgrade of our technology infrastructure and security systems. A high-level summary has been provided in the board packet, along with an executive narrative to describe the changes and the details of this budget request. As you compare the budget request for FY 26 with FY 25 appropriations, several factors explain any variances in the requested funding. For the operations portion of the FY 26 budget, the total request increased by 2.8%, which is primarily due to several factors. The first is an increase in personal service and Social Security costs of about 8.9%, which is attributable to a combination of funding the annual staff COLA, funding the 10% of the compensated absences liability, filling critical vacancies, and setting aside funds for overtime. Increases in contractual services of approximately 6% will also allow the agency to obtain necessary software for continued cloud migration activities, as well as addressing standing audit findings. In addition, SBE will be able to procure classes necessary to improve and maintain the agency's IT standard. The increased costs are largely attributed to professional services from contractual vendors and the associated costs of new software and also hardware that's associated with our continued migration. Travel costs are increased to address the demand of more travel to classes, and the inflation affecting the mileage and lodging reimbursement for all staff travel. And the above increases are offset by a decrease in printing, equipment, and matching state funds categories due to the off cycle for election activities. When considering these factors, the SBE has prepared a responsible and reasonable budget while considering the current and future operational needs of the agency. The FY26 request covers all SBE operations, grant programs, and mandated activities. It results in a decrease of approximately 2.06% compared to FY25 appropriations. I'd like to thank Assistant Executive Director Jeremy Kirk and Agency CFO Elena Gutselenko for their efforts to prepare this request. Both are available for questions. I am as well. And at this point, I will turn it over to the board to consider the request and ask for a motion at some point to approve the request as drafted. Thank you.
Any questions from any of the board members?
Yes, Madam Chair. Bernadette, I just have one quick question. You see where the state is in a budget shortfall or whatever they're discussing in the upcoming session about budget. And I see where the governor's requested that agencies put in less, to make cuts. How do you see this affecting our budget? I know we're a little bit different than a normal state agency, but do you see any problems in that regard since we're so small?
I think although we're not directly organized under the governor, we still take those requests and those mandates seriously and attempt to do that in our budget. We really think that what we've prepared here and presented meets the demands of the agency and also the maintenance of staff, well, and while also taking into account that request and keeping it narrowly tailored to what we need this fiscal year to operate and to continue to upgrade the systems.
Sounds good. Madam Chair, I'd make a motion that we approve the proposed budget for fiscal year 2025.
Is there a second?
Second.
Roll call, Mrs. Cal. Any other questions?
Madam Chair, I think I need to amend mine. It's 2026, am I correct?
It's the FY 2026 budget.
Yes, apologize. I would amend my motion to reflect the appropriations for fiscal year 2026.
Is there a second on the amendment?
Second.
Mrs. Calvin, roll call, please.
Ms. Bellercroft,
Yes.
Ms. Cray?
Yes.
Ms. Genovese?
Yes.
Ms. McCrory?
Yes.
Mr. Turbin?
Yes.
Mr. Brett?
Yes.
Vice Chair Donahue?
Yes.
Chair Watson?
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you, Mrs. Calvin.
Madam
Please-
Chair,
Yes.
I would just ask that as they did last year for the legislative subcommittee, I know I'm a little early, I know this will happen in February, but if they could get the complete budget narrative and the LAS forms to the legislative subcommittee when they turn those into the General Assembly, that would be greatly appreciated.
Bernadette, your answer?
No problem. Once we have them completed, we're happy to share them with the legislative subcommittee.
Thank you.
When you send them, Bernadette, to the legislative subcommittee, can you make sure that Laura and I also receive them at that time?
Yes, we will make sure that you're copied on the transmission. Also, throughout the budget hearings and the legislative session, we try to loop the subcommittee in should there be any issues that arise. We can generally also advise leadership if any concerns come up or any points of contention with the budget request.
And as a request to the subcommittee, can you make sure that all of your concerns are sent to all of the board members so that we might have the information on your concerns, should you have any?
Yes, Rick and I will make sure we do that.
Thank you. Any other questions? Madam Executive Director, please continue.
Okay, the next item is a ranked choice and voting systems task force update. A memo was prepared by Brian Pryor, Senior Policy Advisor, to executive staff and members of the board. This memo was prepared at the request of member Cray at last month's meeting. The memo covers the background of the task force and its establishment, the meeting dates and testimony that was heard at those meetings, the preliminary recommendations that were noted at the most recent meeting, as well as a note that a final meeting is to be held to approve the report, and then the report is to be published. Once that report is published, it will be public. We will be able to review the formal recommendations of that task force. This memo is informational. However, if there's any questions related to the task force or the subject matter, we're happy to discuss it right now.
Well, Bernadette, I had several conversations with you last week. I also had a conversation with Brian. I understand that there was some questions that came up at the last meeting from Senator Murphy. Is that correct?
There were not necessarily questions from Senator Murphy, but she did acknowledge that there was issues with administrative support of the task force. The State Board of Elections is not seated on the task force itself. We do not have an appointed member to the task force, but by statute, we are mandated to provide administrative support. So in follow-up to that comment, Brian Pryor will be reaching out to Senator Murphy as well as the co-chair of the task force to troubleshoot any of the administrative support that we provided, receive feedback on the support, and request how this support can be improved for a task force in the future. The State Board of Elections typically is not seated on task forces. However, we typically are mandated to provide that administrative support. So as we move forward with this task force or any other, we do want to make sure that we're meeting the administrative support standard for the General Assembly.
Is Brian available?
He's not at the meeting today, no. But he's available for discussion and follow-up.
I wanted to make sure that all of the board members understand that Senator Murphy, who is the head of the the election committee for the legislature. Is that correct, Madam Executive Director?
Yes, I believe so.
She had some questions about whether or not we were acting in the best interest or some such of the task force. I was very concerned about it. I requested some documents from Amy Calvin as well as Brian to find out exactly what her concerns were. Bernadette indicated to me that we only have administrative responsibilities. I wanted to let all of you all know that we're trying to determine exactly what Senator Murphy's questions are with respect to the State Board of Elections, since she mentioned the State Board of Election, and from my interpretation, inferred some negligence on our behalf.
Madam Chair, I attended all the ranked choice voting task force meetings with Brian. And the first or second one, the one we attended in person in room 400 in the Capitol building, Brian talked to her about that. And she mentioned it. This was last year. They thought the state board should do all the work behind the scenes in getting people to testify and do all this stuff. And was not our job. And Brian assumed he had cleared that up with her initially, but obviously not. So, but we were not there to have to staff as she perceived it. Am I correct on that, Bernadette?
You are correct. At the at the onset of
However, at the excuse me, Bernadette, and in response to Vice Chair, it was at the last meeting, the
I know,
November meeting,
I know. And
that she
it,
raised these issues. I have
yes,
not been able to get the minutes of that meeting yet. So we really don't know exactly what Senator Murphy's questions or statements were.
yes, I heard them. And it has to do with administrative services support. And she thought that, assumed that we were to do all this work, and that's not what the legislation said. And Brian had talked to her about that almost a year ago when the first initial meeting, when we told her that's not what we do. We were not
So
commissioned to do.
obviously there's still some
Yes,
non-communication
correct.
going on. And I hope to hear from Brian very soon, Madam Executive Director, about whether or not I need to call Senator Murphy and have a direct conversation with her, or whether or not you, Madam Executive Director, may talk with her so that we can alleviate any problem or misunderstanding.
Madam Chair, can I hear the answer to Vice Chair Donahue's?
I can't hear you. I can't hear you.
Member McCrory asked if I could answer Vice Chair Donahue's question, confirming the issue in the beginning of the task force as to what our duties were in the administrative support space. So yes, at the onset of the task force, when it was first meeting, the requests in my review seemed to go beyond administrative support, including preparing agendas and possibly requesting different testimony or subject matter for discussion. Being a bipartisan board with a nonpartisan staff, we wanted to limit and not guide the agenda of a task force. So we reiterated that administrative support would be hosting meetings, potentially taking those minutes. We were willing to do that as well, and compiling documents that were requested from us by task force members, but with approval of a full task force in order to provide that for the better good of the discussion. So that was an initial conversation we had. We did not necessarily hear back that there was disagreement that our role would be limited to a purely administrative support space. So at the last meeting, when it was noted, there was just a general notation that there were administrative support. I believe the word used was snafus. It wasn't even necessarily directed at the State Board of Elections by name. It was just generally noted. But knowing that we are to provide that support, we took it to be directed at us, and therefore we are going to follow up and request a discussion with Senator Murphy about that comment.
Member McCrory,
Yes, I'm satisfied. Thank you.
thank you. Any other questions? Please continue, Madam Executive Director.
So can we get an update on that conversation after it happens?
Yes. Yeah, sure. Okay, the next items on the agenda are all informational. There's the 2024 staff conferences. I requested that staff that participated in out-of-state travel to attend conferences provide the reports that they're required to prepare related to that out-of-state travel to the board. This is just an informational item, so the board is aware of the type of conferences that staff members are attending and the type of subject matter that we seek further education on, both within the election related space and also the technical or election security space. So those are provided as informational items. Also the voter registration activity, FY25 fiscal status reports, and the 2-year plan of staff activity for the months of December and January are all provided as informational. But should the members have any questions, we are happy to answer them.
Do the members have any question on those issues, the informational issues? Is there anything further, Madam Executive Director, under your report?
There is nothing else from me. Thank you.
Is there any other business that needs to come before the board at this time? Mrs. Calvin, do we have any comments from the general public at this time?
Not in Springfield.
May I have a motion and a second to go into executive session for the purpose of discussing pending legislation pursuant to text sections 2C11 of the Open Meetings Act 5 ILCS 120.
Oh, if I could interject really quickly, this is to discuss litigation, not legislation.
So amended, as stated by the chair, I move that we go into executive session for discussing pending litigation.
Can I have a motion and a second, please?
So moved.
Second.
Roll call, Mrs. Calvin.
Ms. Ballard Croft,
Yes.
Ms. Cray?
Yes.
Ms. Genovese? I think.
Yes.
Ms. McCrory?
Yes.
Mr. Turbin?
Yes.
Mr. Brett?
Yes.
Vice Chair Donahue?
Yes.
Chair Watson?
Yes.
Motion passes.